Welcome to Honeybee. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. Real stories of love, lies, and betrayal, where every truth stings. Let's begin. Sometimes, losing someone who never truly appreciated your worth is the first real step toward finding everything you were meant to have. And sometimes, life has an impeccable sense of timing when it comes to showing people exactly what they gave up. My name is Russell, and this is a story of how my wife ended our 13-year marriage, saying I couldn't give her the life she wanted, only for everything to change 3 months later. I'm 42 years old, and I own a residential and commercial HVAC installation and repair company. I built it from the ground up more than 10 years ago, started with nothing but myself and a single truck. Today, it's grown into a solid business with 8 technicians working under me. The income it brings in is steady and comfortable, not luxurious, but enough for a good living. Christine and I were together for 2 years before we got married. She always said she admired my drive, how determined I was to build something of my own instead of working for someone else. Those early years of marriage were genuinely good. We rented a cozy 3-bedroom house in a nice neighborhood, had our son after 3 years together, and created what looked like a stable middle-class family life. When our son was little, Christine worked part-time, and we naturally shared the household responsibilities between our schedules. But after about 7 or 8 years of marriage, I began to notice changes in her attitude, especially about money and lifestyle. She had earned her real estate license and started working as an agent. The problem was that job surrounded her with people who lived far more luxurious lives than ours. She began socializing with agents and clients who owned large homes, drove expensive cars, and traveled to exotic places. Slowly, her outlook shifted. She started saying our home was too small, that our cars were outdated, and that we never did anything exciting. She compared our lives unfavorably to her friends, and those comparisons became constant, tinged with growing resentment. Her real estate income was unpredictable. Sometimes she'd make a big sale and bring home a nice commission, but other times she'd go weeks or months barely earning anything, despite spending plenty on advertising, open houses, and client meetings. The inconsistency made planning our finances tough. But every time I suggested she consider something more stable, she'd take it as an insult, accusing me of not believing in her or her career. About 3 years ago, things started to spiral. Christine began spending well beyond what we could afford. She'd buy high-end clothes, saying she needed to look successful to impress clients. She insisted we eat at fancy restaurants where other realtors might see us. She booked spa days and beauty appointments that cost hundreds of dollars. Whenever I raised concerns about these expenses, she'd snap back that I was cheap, unsupportive, and holding her back. I tried to stay calm and practical, balancing business expenses, payroll, and maintaining a safety cushion for slow months. I paid myself a reasonable salary that kept us comfortable, but not extravagant. That stability didn't appeal to Christine. She wanted to live as if we made double what we actually did. The arguments about money became more frequent and much harsher. Christine accused me of being complacent, of lacking ambition, of being satisfied with just a small business, instead of expanding into something bigger. She said she'd expected more from me, that I wasn't living up to the potential she believed I had. I'd remind her that we already had a good life, more than many families ever get, but she no longer saw things that way. She was focused entirely on comparison, what other people had, what they spent, and what we didn't. That obsession poisoned everything. The emotional closeness we once shared disappeared. We stopped talking about anything other than money or complaints. Our intimacy faded from genuine affection to something mechanical and forced. We were no longer partners. We were 2 unhappy people sharing the same roof for the sake of our son. Our son, who was about 7 when the worst of it began, couldn't help but notice. He'd quietly retreat to his room whenever we argued. I'd see the confusion on his face when Christine made cutting remarks about my work or our home at the dinner table. I tried to protect him from the tension, but it's impossible to hide that kind of strain from a child. The final breaking point came after our 12th year of marriage. Christine had taken a 2-week vacation to Hawaii with her realtor friends, spending over $4,000 that we didn't have budgeted. When I confronted her about it, she exploded. She said she was done asking for permission to live her life. that she was tired of being married to a man with no ambition, tired of settling for mediocrity. I was stunned, but I told her she was that unhappy. Maybe we needed to question whether this marriage still made sense. Instead of calming down or trying to work things out, she agreed. Just like that. She said she'd been thinking the same thing, that maybe we'd simply grown too far apart. Over the next few months, we had several more discussions about separating. Every time, she seemed more certain that divorce was the only path forward. I still hope we could rebuild what we once had, but Christine was already gone in every emotional sense. Her resentment and envy had consumed her completely. Eventually, she told me she had met with a divorce lawyer and planned to file. She made it sound as if it was entirely my fault, that I hadn't given her the life she deserved, that I lacked ambition, and that I'd stifled her dreams of a more glamorous life. The irony was that her own unstable income had done more damage to our finances than anything else. But she never saw that. When the divorce process began, it felt cold and transactional. Christine didn't even fight for custody of our son, which broke my heart. During the initial discussions with the lawyers, she actually suggested that he live primarily with me since my schedule was more predictable and his school was close to our home. She asked for every other weekend and a few holidays, the bare minimum. It felt like she viewed motherhood as an inconvenience rather than a responsibility. She never expressed sadness about seeing our son less, never talked about missing him. She was entirely focused on the money, how our modest assets would be divided, whether she could get alimony, how much she could take from what little we had saved. The financial negotiations were unpleasant but simple. Her lawyer pushed for spousal support, but since we both earned comparable amounts during the marriage and she had the ability to make more as a realtor, the judge denied it. For months after she filed, the divorce was finalized. I was awarded full custody of our son, while Christine got visitation every other weekend. She moved into an apartment closer to the wealthier neighborhoods where her clients lived, and my son and I stayed in our family home. The first few months were emotionally heavy, but manageable. My son struggled with questions, wondering why his mom left, and if any of it was his fault. I reassured him that none of it was, and that sometimes adults just grow apart. I told him his mom and I both loved him, even if we couldn't live together anymore. Financially, things were surprisingly better. Without Christine's reckless spending, I could finally manage our budget properly and start saving again. The peace in our home was noticeable. For the first time in years, life felt calm. Then, 3 months after the divorce was finalized, everything changed. I received a call on my business one morning from a lawyer who said he was the executor of my aunt's estate. He needed to discuss some important matters with me. My aunt, my mother's younger sister, had lived in California for decades. She married an older businessman, and I'd only met her a few times when I was young. They never had children and lived quietly in Santa Barbara, managing several real estate investments. The lawyer told me my aunt had passed away the previous month from a stroke. Her husband had died about 5 years earlier, leaving everything to her. And now, in her will, she had named me as her primary beneficiary. At first, I thought it was a scam, one of those fake inheritance calls. But the lawyer knew personal family details that no scammer would. He invited me to his office to review the documents in person. I drove there the following week, still half convinced there was some mistake. But once I sat down with him and saw the official paperwork, the truth hit me hard. My aunt had left me her entire estate. The total value? Around $13 million. It included multiple rental properties, both commercial and residential, worth over $8 million, plus investments, stocks, bonds, and about $2 million in liquid cash. The lawyer explained that my aunt had always admired my work ethic. She'd followed my progress to my mother and liked that I had built my own company from nothing. She and her husband had agreed long ago that their wealth should go to family members who actually worked hard, not to those who simply expected handouts. I sat there in shock, struggling to believe it. $13 million. More money than I ever imagined having in my lifetime. Now suddenly mine. I felt an overwhelming mix of disbelief, gratitude, and awe. The lawyer explained that everything was already through probate, and all I needed to do was sign paperwork to transfer the assets. Even after taxes and fees, I would still receive over $11 million. Driving home that day, I was in a daze. This meant financial security not just for me, but for my son's entire future. It meant I could expand my business without debt, or even retire early if I chose. But more than that, it meant peace of mind. I'd never have to worry about bills or risk losing everything again. Still, I knew sudden wealth could destroy people if they weren't careful. I'd seen enough stories of lottery winners and heirs whose lives fell apart under pressure. So I decided to handle it quietly and wisely. I only told my mother and brother about the inheritance. I wanted to keep it private while I figured out how to manage it. I hired a financial advisor who specialized in helping people manage large inheritances and an attorney for asset protection. Together, we created a long-term plan to integrate the money into my life responsibly. The first step was clearing all debt, personal and business. I paid off every loan, vehicle, and outstanding balance. Then I set up a trust for my son's education and future. I invested most of the funds in stable, diversified assets to generate passive income while preserving the principal. I did allow myself a few upgrades, nothing flashy, just small improvement for comfort, but I avoided anything that would draw unnecessary attention. Despite my discretion, word eventually got out. I'm fairly certain my mother mentioned my aunt's passing and inheritance in casual conversation, and from there, gossip spread. About 6 weeks later, Christine called. We hadn't spoken much since the divorce, aside from scheduling arrangements for our son. Her voice carried the same sharp tone I remembered too well. She asked straight out if it was true that I'd inherited money from an aunt. I said yes. A relative had passed and left me some assets. Her next question was how much. She claimed she had a right to know if it affected child support or any other financial matters from the divorce. I told her calmly that the inheritance was none of her business, and it didn't affect our agreement or my obligations as a father. That's when she lost her temper. She accused me of hiding assets during the divorce, saying I must have known about the inheritance beforehand. I explained clearly that my aunt had died 2 months after our divorce was finalized and that everything was documented. Christine refused to believe me. She insisted I must have known and intentionally concealed family wealth. The call ended with her threatening to contact her lawyer. My attorney advised me to document everything, just in case. 2 weeks later, I was served with legal papers. Christine had filed a motion in family court, claiming I had hidden marital assets during the divorce. When the court papers arrived, I stood in the doorway holding them for several minutes, my hands trembling with disbelief. I thought I had already lived through the hardest part of my marriage, the betrayal, the arguments, the coldness, but this felt like another blow from someone who had already taken enough from me. Christine claimed in her motion that I had willfully concealed marital assets, that my aunt's inheritance had been anticipated prior to the dissolution of marriage, and therefore should be considered part of the marital estate. In other words, she wanted to share something that didn't even exist when we were married. I took the papers straight to my lawyer, Mark, the same attorney who had handled my divorce. After reading the claims, he leaned back in his chair, rubbing his forehead with a faint smile that carried both amusement and frustration. "She doesn't have a case," he said firmly. "Inheritance acquired after the divorce isn't marital property. The court will throw this out once we present the timeline." But I wasn't as calm as he was. Christine was unpredictable, and I knew she wouldn't stop easily. I could already imagine her spinning false narratives, that I'd planned this, that I'd cheated her out of millions. Mark filed a response, attaching proof of the timeline, the date of my aunt's death, the will, and all communication with his state lawyer. Everything clearly showed that I hadn't known anything until months after the divorce. Still, the court scheduled a hearing. When the day came, Christine walked into the courtroom dressed as though she were attending a corporate awards ceremony. Elegant dress, polished hair, jewelry that glimmered beneath the fluorescent lights. But what struck me most wasn't her appearance. It was her expression. She wore the confident, smug smile of someone who believed they were about to win. When her attorney began presenting her argument, he painted me as a manipulative husband who had deceived his wife about his financial background. He said there was evidence that I had maintained contact with my aunt and could have reasonably expected to inherit a significant estate. It was surreal listening to those lies. I wanted to stand up and shout that my aunt had been distant for decades, that I hadn't even known about her health condition until after her passing. But I stayed silent, letting my lawyer handle it. Mark calmly dismantled their claims one by one. He presented the death certificate, the estate timeline, and copies of emails showing when I was first contacted. Every piece of evidence supported the truth. The judge nodded along, clearly unimpressed by Christine's attorney's emotional theatrics. When Christine took the stand, her performance reached another level. She dabbed her eyes with a tissue as she claimed that I had promised her we'd one day live comfortably for my family's wealth, that I had always kept secrets about my finances. She even implied that my aunt had intended to leave me money for years, and that I must have known. The judge asked one simple question. "Mrs. Owens, do you have any evidence of these alleged promises or communications?" Christine hesitated. Then quietly, she said no. The courtroom fell silent. Mark stood up. "Your Honor, my client's inheritance was received 3 months after the dissolution of marriage. There is no legal or moral basis for this claim. We respectfully request dismissal, with the court noting this as an abuse of process." The judge agreed. Christine's motion was dismissed on the spot. But before she left, she gave me one of those looks, cold, sharp, and resentful. A look that told me she wasn't finished. And she wasn't. A week later, she started showing up at my son's school unexpectedly. She began calling more often, asking to see him outside her visitation schedule. She brought gifts, expensive ones, trying to win his affection. I didn't want to interfere with their relationship, but it became obvious what she was doing. She wasn't suddenly a loving mother. She was trying to create leverage. Then came the second wave of legal trouble. This time, Christine filed for custody modification. Her new claim? That my recent financial situation had made me too busy for our son, and that I was unable to provide the same emotional availability as before. It was pure nonsense. My son and I had a strong bond. I picked him up from school daily, helped him with homework, cooked dinner with him, and spent weekends playing basketball or camping. But Christine knew that dragging me into court again would at least cause stress, even if she didn't win. When the custody hearing began, my son's school counselor submitted a statement describing how stable and happy he was living with me. She said he often spoke about how much he enjoyed the calm environment at home and how his father always made time for him. That letter, along with several witnesses, my employees, neighbors, even my mother, completely demolished Christine's accusations. At one point, the judge even addressed her directly. "Mrs. Owens, the court does not appreciate being used as a tool for personal revenge. Custody is about the best interest of the child, not financial jealousy." The judge denied her motion immediately. Christine looked humiliated. Her lawyer whispered something, but she ignored him, staring straight at me with eyes that burned with anger. She stormed out before the session even ended. After that day, I decided to draw a clear boundary. Communication with Christine would only happen through messages regarding our son, nothing more. I refused to engage in any emotional or personal discussion. Months passed quietly. My business continued to grow, my son flourished in school, and I carefully managed the inherited estate, investing in long-term projects that generated steady returns. For the first time in years, my life felt grounded, peaceful. Then one evening, everything took an unexpected turn again. Christine showed up at my doorstep unannounced. It was late, around 9 p.m. I opened the door to see her standing there, dressed casually for once, her eyes puffy and tired. For a moment, she looked like the woman I had once known, before the greed, before the bitterness. "Russell," she said softly, her voice trembling, "can we talk?" I hesitated, but out of respect and concern, I stepped aside and let her in. She sat at the dining table, nervously fidgeting with her hands. I made mistakes," she began. "I was angry and selfish. I let money blind me. I hurt you and I hurt our son. I'm not asking for forgiveness right away, but I needed to tell you that I'm sorry." Her words felt genuine, almost fragile. I didn't know what to say at first. I had imagined this moment many times, but hearing her admit fault was something I'd never expected. Part of me wanted to lash out, to remind her of the humiliation, the accusations, the court battles. But another part, the part that had loved her once, just felt a deep sadness. "I appreciate your apology," I said quietly. "But you didn't just hurt me, Christine. You broke our family. You turned something beautiful into a competition." She nodded, tears filling her eyes. "I know. I've been losing clients, struggling with debt. I thought money was everything, but now I realize what I threw away." There it was, the truth behind her visit. She wasn't here for love. She was here because life had finally shown her the price of her choices. "I'm not here for money," she added quickly, as if reading my mind. "I swear I'm not. I just want to be better. For our son. Maybe one day we can be friends." I sighed deeply. "For our son's sake, we can be civil. But that's all. I've moved on, Christine. I'm not angry anymore, but I can't go back." She nodded again, silently wiping her tears. After a few minutes, she stood up and left without another word. I watched her walk down the driveway, the sound of her heels fading into the night. When the door closed behind her, I felt an unexpected peace. Not triumph, not revenge, just closure. Life has a way of teaching lessons without needing your help, and Christine learned hers the hard way. Over time, she stopped trying to manipulate situations. She focused more on rebuilding her career, though she never regained the high-end lifestyle she'd once craved. Our son grew into a compassionate, mature young man who understood that money couldn't measure happiness. As for me, I used my fortune not as a tool for revenge, but as a foundation for something meaningful. I expanded my company, created jobs, and started a small scholarship fund in my aunt's name to help underprivileged students in trade schools. Every time I saw one of them succeed, I felt like I was honoring her memory in the best possible way. A few years later, when I look back at everything, the heartbreak, the divorce, the lawsuits, I realized something important. Losing Christine was never a tragedy. It was a turning point. Her leaving didn't destroy me. It freed me. And sometimes that's what fate does. It breaks you open so something stronger, wiser, and more peaceful can grow in your place. The man I am now would never trade that lesson for all the money in the world. Because peace, after all, is the greatest fortune anyone can inherit.